Hey, it's Brittany and Cat from Common Ground, and you're listening to our chapter of As the Story Grows.
Welcome to the next chapter of As the Story Grows. I'm Brian Patton. This week, I'm excited to welcome Brittany Hughes and Cathrine Yee from Common Ground Collective to the podcast. As I've stated many times on this show before, whenever Britt sends a band my way, I know it's going to be worth my time to listen, and they haven't let me down yet. Britt and Cat discuss their musical backgrounds, how they ended up working at Hopeless Records, and how that experience influenced the early days of Common Ground. We then discuss transitioning from a full-fledged record label to a management and artist development company. There's a link in the show notes to Common Ground's Bandcamp page, and I highly recommend picking up a handful of releases and supporting independent music. Enjoy getting to know Cat and Britt from Common Ground Collective.
I feel like I swallowed my bitter pills dry. Now I'm Googling, how do I get rid of this lump in my throat? I'm thinking, how after everything could you have all these doubts? And now all I'm concerned about right now is staying afloat. I can't help but think it's a matter of time. Everything worth having in this world could never be mine. It should never be mine.
Well, thanks for hanging out and joining. I'm excited to talk. I became familiar with Common Ground because of Glacier Veins, when you signed Glacier Veins. I tried to put out their first EP on cassette, but they had already doing with Ronald Records. Yeah. I tried to put that out on cassette, and they were like, "Oh, sorry, we already have that." And I was like, "Damn it!"
Yeah, you go way back with the band. That's awesome.
Really
Yeah.
early days.
Yeah, that's before we even knew them, I feel like. So.
Yeah, it's cool. Well, let's get a little bit of background, whichever one of you wants to start. Well, let me just ask, are both of you from California originally?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she's down in LA now. I'm from LA. I am up in San Francisco now, and she's from up here in the Bay. So, but when we started the label, we both were in LA together. So it started there.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
But yeah, we can kind of I guess just go from the beginning of how we came to start Common Ground and just kind of go from there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what got you guys into music? First off, what got you
Yeah, we can
involved
even
in
go
the
back
scene?
that
And
far, yeah.
let's throw it way back.
Yeah.
Well, when I was born, I heard Paramore. No, I was kidding. No, but I mean, for me, getting into music itself, I was always really the kid that was just, I loved discovering music.
Mm-hmm.
I think the first band that I feel I got obsessed with was Blink-182 in third grade. My brother listened to them, had gotten their CDs, gotten my parents to buy the Blink CDs for him. And then he let me listen to them with him. And to the point where eventually my parents got me a CD player. And we would be listening to the exact same Blink-182 CD simultaneously on separate Walkmans together.
Nice.
And pressing play, so both of us would listen to the album in full together. So that was my first kind of obsession with a band. My parents took me to pop concerts and stuff, Spice Girls and Avril Lavigne and Britney Spears, NSYNC, all that kind of stuff when I was really young. And then as I got older, iTunes became a thing, and I was just scouring iTunes and LimeWiring every single song I could find under the alternative rock genre from there. And I just kind of really just started getting really into, I guess, punk and alternative from the beginning. I think Avril was really the the trendsetter for me,
Nice.
Being like, yeah, here's a sick like skater chick. At the time I was like, well, my AIM name was Skater Chick Rules 4, so like I really connected with Avril Lavigne and like that whole look. And yeah, and then I kind of like, as getting into high school, like I decided I was gonna like pick up guitar. Like I had taken some piano lessons in middle school. My mom was like, you should take piano lessons, and I was like, okay. It was like an elective at middle school I could pick, so I needed one, so I picked piano, and I loved it. And then as high school came around, I was like, hey, can I get a guitar? Like I'll teach myself how to play. So I did. I just watched a bunch of YouTube videos. I think the first song I may have taught myself might have been Into Your Arms by The Maine, by watching a YouTube tutorial on it. So
Nice.
Again, yeah, just kind of on that journey. And then I started going to Warped Tour about that time. And I think when I was starting to go to Warped Tour really was like the time I was like, what are these tents with these record labels? Like, what did those people do? Who are these people that are like, are behind the stage, like helping these bands, like during the show? Like, I didn't really like understand what a music job was, but I was kind of like interested in those people for whatever reason, like that side of it. And then, yeah, just kind of from there, like started being interested in management, like managed my first band when I was managed my first band in quotes at 18, just like some friends I made at Warped Tour literally. And they're like, hey, do you want to like manage us? And I didn't really do much at all for that band. I think I made a couple Facebook posts for them. And yeah, until after college, or like as I was ending college, was when I started doing like music internships and stuff in LA, like on my summers home. And that's basically how Kat and I got connected. But we can start from there after she goes through her journey as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
My journey. I think definitely as a kid, if we're talking like pop punk specifically and stuff, I think the first bands I really got exposed to were probably like I would say like Green Day and Fall Out Boy were on the radio a lot when I was in elementary school. I feel like my experience is a bit different just in being a few years younger.
Yeah.
But that was like during American Idiot and From Under the Cork Tree, when they're really, really mainstream. And, you know, I listened to those songs. I didn't really, like, dive into the genre in particular or anything. And then in 8th grade, I remember a friend showed me Dear Maria by All Time Low. I got really into that and started getting more into the genre. There's a lot of neon stuff at the time. So it was, like, Fall Out Boy, All Time Low, The Maine, We the Kings, Newfound Glory, things like that.
When you say neon, do you mean the merchandise?
Oh no, it's just like I feel like
okay.
that era of like 2007 to 2009 pop punk, it's described as the neon era.
Okay.
The merch was very like
I'm old. I remember when merch went like neon and very bright and big bold like graphics, bright, and I was like, I hate this. All
the dudes had the hair that like went out.
Yeah.
We were all wearing I Heart Boobies bracelets.
Yeah, very yeah, that was the era that I unfortunately fell into, not the cooler stuff that came before and after. But yeah, there were a few blogs at the time that I spent a lot of time on. That was around the same time that I got to have my own laptop. Sometimes my parents would go in phases of letting me have it or taking it away. But I got into a few blogs, like Absolute Punk, I think is the big one. And then this other one, which like no one I've ever met ever seems to know about. But Pete Wentz had this blog at the time called Friends or Enemies. And he got all these other band guys in the scene to blog on it. So like All Time Low would blog on it, Cobra Starship would blog on it, The Maine, 4 Year Strong. You know, very much the Decadence world and Fueled by Ramen world were on this site, and I spent a lot of time on that too. Got really big into Tumblr and like just started really following the bands beyond the music. Like I knew when like I knew when like future releases were coming out and things like that, and started learning how like bands will put out singles and then albums and then like music videos with those singles. Things that like the maybe casual music fan doesn't really pay a lot of attention to. And then like I remember my freshman year of high school, like one of my friends noticed I was really into all this stuff, and she called it music politics, and she was like, I could see you working in that stuff and doing well in it. Because also during this whole time, I had been attempting to learn a lot of instruments and like failing miserably at it. So I already knew like that is not for me. So then she told me about this whole side, and I was like, oh, like that's kind of cool. I was already kind of familiar with labels, because also around that time I was becoming a fan of labels. So like Field is a big one, Hopeless, Fearless, among other ones. And so I was like, oh yeah, there is like this whole industry side of it that I'd never known about. And then, got a lot more serious about it with college. Like I specifically applied to almost only schools exclusively in LA and New York, because I knew I wanted to like get that going once I was in college. I ended up picking LA, and so I moved down here for school, and just did like a ton of internships. I studied it in school. My school offered like a music industry minor that I was in, and I guess that ties into how we met.
I said 1,000 times, you know I'll never lie. I just don't know why I can't get you out of my head. I can't believe that I'm not over you yet. I can't get you out of my head. I can't believe that I'm not over you yet. I'm not over you yet.
Yeah.
But we met through this other internship where she had been there first, and then I interned there maybe a year later or something. And that company, the people there were very close knit. Like there was a small group of us that were just kind of hanging out as friends normally. And so one guy there, like we had not met, but he knew her from before, and then he met me, and then he kind of put the two together, like, oh, like you two should meet up.
Shout out to Sean Carpenter.
Yeah, Sean, our friend Sean. And so we met at a We Are the In Crowd show at Chain Reaction, probably one of their very last tours they ever did. And then I interned at she was working at Hopeless at the time.
Yeah.
And then I interned for her that following summer when I was in school still.
Nice. What were you doing at Hopeless?
My title was executive assistant to the president, but it doesn't really give a very clear idea of what I did, which is just like a bunch of things. So, like kind of my main thing obviously was like, assisting the president, like in all the day-to-day kind of stuff, like scheduling meetings, travel, all that kind of things that like an assistant would do. But at that point, like Lewis had like had a full team under him and everything, so his kind of duties as the president kind of were more of like overseeing the company as a whole, like as a leader, like keeping the culture cool and like making sure like all the employees were good and taken care of and everything like that. And more like larger scale business development sort of things. So I'd kind of like go with him to all the meetings with like important contacts and things like that, distributor meetings, and like just things to expand Hopeless as a brand and a company. And then me and Lewis together were very involved in like the signing bands aspect as well. Like, everything kind of like came to him and touched him last. If anyone at the label was like discovering a new band that they were excited about, we'd kind of have like a weekly meeting together and kind of be like, this is really cool. Let's get like a meeting set up with this band. So that was essentially like most of what I did there. And then Hopeless also has like a charity arm underneath them called Subcity that I got pretty involved with. At the time, like no one was fully like heading it. And I was just like really interested and like really passionate about that. I thought it was like super cool that like I'd never heard of another label like having a charity under the label. So I thought that was like really cool. And yeah, I just like wanted to be part of that. So I was doing a lot of projects with Subcity as well. And that's actually like Kat, her role as my intern was like a Subcity intern as well. So we mainly focused on Subcity projects, I feel like, and A&R stuff, like discovering new bands for the label. So
That's cool. Is that kind of how, I mean, you could tell the story of how Common Ground, but was it like, they're totally wrong to reject this band, we have to put out their album?
Essentially, yeah.
I don't know if it ever went that
Not
but you know, we were there like listening to a few different bands and giving our opinions on some of the bands that Hopeless signed at that time, as well as just kind of like hanging out and like becoming friends with other bands just local in LA around that time. And there was a band we were friends with at the time, and we did kind of float them to Hopeless, and they did not sign them. I don't think we were like, oh my god, like they're crazy. It was much more like, okay, like we'll just help them out.
Yeah.
And we kind of had this idea of, you know, having our own label just to kind of work on what we wanted to work on and things like that, and just learn more about that side of it.
Yeah, I think we saw kind of this, you know, more developing kind of smaller side of the scene. You know, the bands that would like open for all the big tours like down at Chain, we were spending a lot of time at Chain Reaction, obviously. Going to shows like almost every weekend and stuff, and just these like local bands down there that were opening these shows were the ones that we are kind of more of the same age with, or more like, you know, just kind of seeing around all the time. So yeah, I think we just kind of like started noticing these bands, you know, are more developing kind of like on the level we felt we were at in our careers as well, and that we could all kind of grow together, and it just kind of happened really organically that way, I feel like. Mm-hmm.
That's cool. So 2015, the first release. That's correct. Yeah.
Yes, I believe August of 2015 was
the postseason Such a Mess split.
Yeah, our split with the two bands. I will say, like, as much as it sort of came together casually, we did try to start the label properly. You know, I think a lot of DIY labels, they start kind of like on handshakes, or like, like they'll just make some cassettes or this or that. But we definitely we were like, okay, like, let's start the label. Like, we came up with the name, we got a logo made, we filed for a DBA and business permit in the state of California. We bought the website, we got the social handles, we put together a somewhat decent recording contract, and we kind of had all that laid out when we launched the split, and we signed one of the bands on the split, Such a Mess, to a proper deal. Like, we put out another EP with them later on. But we did try to kind of go into it of like, okay, let's lay the groundwork of what a legit company is, and then kind of see how it goes from there. I don't think we were ever really just the like handshake, see what happens kind of thing.
Yeah.
And up until like last year, end of 2019, like we really functioned like that, like a real label, you know, signing bands and recording contracts, you know, funding the creation of masters and things like that. You know, really tried to function as a traditional label before we eventually pivoted away from that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I was going to ask if in those early days, were you funding the recording, or was it just these bands need physical merchandise, so we're going to help them with production of CDs or cassettes or whatever you were releasing when you started?
We really tried to take it on as a full label would, as
We were very
like,
ambitious for sure.
Yeah.
you know, as like what you would get signing to Hopeless. Like
Our
really
first release was vinyl, which
Oh.
I wouldn't suggest for anyone else starting it out with just their savings in their pocket.
I did that.
We made physicals. We set up digital distribution.
Yeah.
We, you know, everything, like we help create music videos, artwork, social assets. Like we really tried to run like all sides of how a traditional label would release something, not just like this, like physicals here, this or that here. We made merch for our bands as well. We really tried to do it all, like right from the beginning.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think we both kind of, like, I feel like, maybe we went into it being like, fuck it, see what's going to happen with this, but also being like taking it pretty seriously as well. Like, if we're going to do this, like, let's do it right. And taking kind of like, you know, what we had learned at Hopeless and seeing like how a real label does things. We were already kind of exposed to that. So yeah, we kind of took that knowledge into what we started. And I think also at the point, like, at least for me, I was, from working at Hopeless too, like I was pretty set on like, I know this is kind of what I really like to do, what I want to do. And it was really exciting to me to have the idea of also like obviously working with Lewis, the founder of Hopeless. I was like pretty inspired by it. In general, I was like, he did it, man, maybe I could do it, right? And so, just kind of hit the ground running with the idea, being like, this is something we could have of our own forever, you know? So.
How'd you come up with the name?
So we went through like 100 names, so many. I think so. Yeah, we were like going to Chain Reaction to a show. I think literally on the drive down, like Kat was in the car with us, and we were all just like bouncing names back. What about this records? This anything we saw or thought of would be followed by records.
Yeah. It was like it was a few weeks where any word in a conversation we'd be like that records, like, you know, we were like, oh, like check the barcode, and it was like barcode record. Like just random words, phrases all the time. And then I think we were in the bathroom at Chain Reaction, pre-renovated. It's a lot nicer now. And someone was like, we were having a regular conversation about life, and someone was like, oh, like you just need to find common ground. And then we were like
common ground records?
That was another joke. We were like common ground records, and then we were like, wait, that actually sounds kind of good.
Yeah, it was like light bulb moment.
Yeah. After like just spitting out so many like dumb names, and we were like, okay.
Can you think of ones that like we almost were set, like what was probably the next?
You really liked Elevated Records, which I was not feeling.
Elevated, yeah.
That's maybe the only one.
Is there like something North too, like True North or something?
Yeah, probably something like that.
Obviously, I was listening to State Champs and shit at the time, so I was like anything pop punk. Yeah.
Stopping at a green light, speeding through the stop signs with the top down, baby. All I wanted was for us to drive. One day you need me, next day you're with someone new. Caught up in thinking, why am I still talking to you? You love me not. I hate your man.
That's awesome. Were there things, obviously you were inspired by Hopeless and took a lot from your time at Hopeless Records with you, but were there things that you knew starting a label you wanted to do differently or bring to it as two females coming in, like into the music industry? Obviously, things have shifted so much over the years, but were there things you wanted to bring to the label or offer to your bands that were different, that you were seeing that weren't happening, or just a different perspective you had?
I know one thing we're thinking of is that, working with a lot of developing artists, there's a lot of things you see that are maybe not done super well. They're not very optimized, or they're just not correct or the most effective way to do something. And I think we were kind of like, we can really tighten these things up, and that just because, you're putting out a release on not the biggest budget or resources, like that's not reason that this really still can't be packaged well. And I think that was one thing we initially really wanted to bring to it.
Yeah, I'd agree for sure. Can't really think about too much else, honestly. Yeah. I want to say that we really thought about about the whole vision and what we were going to be different, but really we just kind of just went with it and made it just, we weren't trying to be anything at the time. I feel like we just kind of were putting our personality into it.
Yeah. Our first few signings kind of rolled out all very naturally. Like, that first signing was such a mess, and then every signing after that kind of came from there. Like our second signing, I met while I was on tour, was such a mess, and then the third signing was a band who had played a show with the second band, Something More. That third band was Small Talks, who is now Kaylee, who we now manage. Every band kind of then naturally led to the other for a while.
Yeah.
And still to this day, it's still kind of like this general community that we're in. That it came from. Like we have a friend who worked at Hopeless with us for a while, and then he moved to Portland, Oregon, and then he became friends with Glacier Veins. They popped up on his Instagram. That's how we found them. Like all these bands kind of came through very natural connections that each one just kind of felt like the right project to take on for whatever reason, I feel like it's always hard to explain what someone or what a certain company looks for and what they sign. But, there's just, it's very, very holistic. Like you'll sometimes just listen to the music, look at their socials, get a general vibe, and then feel like a yes or no. But that was kind of, how every signing came about. Like there was just like a good vibe to them that it just felt right. Yeah.
Do you feel like what you're looking for has shifted over the years? Because those first few releases are also like pop punk, like in that vein of emo and pop punk, and it's shifted into a lot more indie rock and pop these last year or so.
Yeah. I feel like it kind of gone with our personal taste, really, right? Kat now works for in EDM, so now she's even more in mainstream than ever before for her day job. But I mean, in general, as we have gotten older too, I just feel with Warped Tour kind of coming to a close as well, both of us kind of just has begun listening to more pop. Obviously, I feel like both of us always have loved pop. Mm-hmm. So I think that's just kind of as we grew as people and grew older, and as the company grew, there's just, obviously the dream would be to work in pop, right? Pop, it's just popular music, right? So
right.
The dream is to just have the biggest artist and the most successful project. So I think it's just kind of naturally progressed that way. In terms of personal taste, what we think sounds good has just kind of lended to every project and how they sound on.
Our artists as well, like they kind of just swayed in that general direction themselves, you know, like Kaylee from Small Talks just on her own has always wanted to veer more towards that direction. And, you know, a few of our pop punk bands that were maybe super pop punk before veered in other directions, or, you know, some of them honestly like stopped being a band, and the ones that we were still working with and growing just happened to be the ones that were maybe more like alternative or this or that. Yeah, it all just kind of like swayed in that way. And I think, you know, for us too, with our interests, I think we definitely are just more interested in the more unique projects of this or that. You know, I don't think we just wanted to work with like super, super bro-y pop punk.
Right.
I think that is like our main space. You know, we did kind of look for things that were kind of had like a unique edge to them or this or that, or just something interesting about them. And I don't know, the roster that we have now just kind of became that, I think.
And I would say also looking for even more inspiration in terms of other companies we looked up to. Like Kat mentioned, Fueled by Ramen was like a pretty big one for us, both of us. I feel like is kind of like the label. We're like, wow, they did something cool in this like alternative rock space that is mainstream. And like, that's always something we felt like we identified as a goal for Common Ground itself. We're like, let's strive for that. Like blending, you know, there's no barriers. There's no limit to what a pop punk or a guitar rock band or whatever it can be. Right. Paramore was like my favorite band. So that was a great example to me of a band that could just like go to, you know, to the moon, like to the limit. There's no limits there. So I have a question for you actually.
Sure.
On all the episodes, you play an intro song. So how are we supposed to pick our intro song?
You can put together a list and tell me what you want.
We can't pick a favorite child though, so I don't know.
Then I'll pick.
Yeah, I don't know who it would be.
What led you guys to change from just a strict record label going into the management side? Did that have to do with like Glacier Veins making the move up to Equal Vision?
Yeah. It definitely played a role in it. But I think for the most part, like when we started, we were looking at the very, very traditional record labels like Fueled by Ramen, Hopeless. And I think by like 2018, 2019, we were noticing a lot more of new kinds of companies that weren't so traditional in their structure. You know, they had management or they had label services or they had different types of like licensing setups. Just a lot of different ways for companies to just simply be music companies, not so strict in what they did, but just that they were involved in the development of these artists. And I think we were very inspired by that. The traditional label setup is definitely not a great setup to start off with brand new anymore these days. You know, you put a lot of money in that then no one ever like really sees afterwards. You know, and then with that setup, you own masters, and I think the conversation the past few years has really, really steered towards like artists having their own masters back, and then also the relationships with our bands by then, like 3-4 years in now with these bands like Glacier Veins and Kaylee, we just had very, very close relationships with them that you know, a lot of labels may not typically have. And it got to the point of like, okay, like if they had a manager, right? The manager is the absolute closest person to the artist. Like that is your, you know, and it's kind of like, who would be this person that would come in that would make sense in that role and that would be even closer. Yeah. And it was kind of like, well, we're already kind of doing that anyways. And then Glacier Veins got the offer from Equal Vision. And it just kind of made sense with all of us to kind of pivot to that role, and open these artists up to maybe new partners that can do a lot more or have more resources than say we do, because with us as the label, they're almost kind of stuck with us doing label and management and only our resources versus being able to bring in more help. So that was kind of like what made sense for the switch. And then we still run a label just because we have that infrastructure set up that it felt like a waste to completely get rid of it. And it kind of enables us to still work with a lot of bands that we maybe don't have the resources to fully manage as well. And so we kind of now run both sides of the company now, where we have our management roster and we have our label roster. But the label has changed now. It's a lot more flexible. It's licensing only deals, and they are as long or short as the band wants them. So some deals are literally just one song. Some deals are a few EPs or one album. It's kind of whatever everyone wants to do. It's like the closest thing to being a handshake, but still being like on paper.
Yeah, it's funny how we've like gone to being very like firm and into how we're structured, into like just being completely fluid towards this point, you know. It's almost and
the way 2020 kind of shook out with the pandemic, and it's like it made sense to be more flexible and be able to just like release singles digitally to keep your artist and yourselves relevant and out there all the time.
Yeah, we're definitely always trying to like pivot, right? Like into staying current of like what is happening. Like we're always trying to keep it on the pulse of like what makes the most sense and what is the most artist friendly thing. So that's really where, I feel like the licensing and all that kind of pivot came from. Were you gonna say that?
Oh, I was gonna say much bigger focus on streaming too than physicals. You know, I think a lot of DIY labels focus on physicals. Like they love the cassettes, they love the vinyl, which is cool. I just think for us, like this more kind of like modern, innovative artist development company was just much more like our space and what we wanted to focus on.
It doesn't move in circles like the way they tell you, like the way they want it said. It doesn't move in circles like the way they tell you, like the way they want it said.
Thanks for listening to As the Story Grows. Our theme song was written and composed by the legendary Bob Nana. If you like what you hear, subscribe on iTunes and give the show a rating and review. If you'd like to support the show financially, click on the Patreon link at asthestorygrows.com. If you enjoyed this episode, share it on social media with your friends. Much appreciated, and thanks for listening.